Awesome.
Welcome, Joanie.
Thank you. Of
Thanks for joining us this morning.
course. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Joanie, you are a professional food photographer. You provide food photography services for food brands. I think you do some commercial work. You do some editorial work, maybe.
Mhm.
Also, you provide services for what else do you do
Yeah, I
in terms
mean,
of
it's
food
kind of runs the gamut. I say my main focus in terms of clients and is primarily commercial work for food brands. So creating content for their websites and social media and print stuff, other things of that nature. So working directly with brands. I don't do too much advertising work, so it's not really a particular focus of mine. I really get into the relationships directly with the food brands and a lot. If you get into the food world, I mean, you may know this, that a lot of food brands, it's a lot of family run businesses.
Yeah.
So creating those relationships and long-term partnerships. And it's, some of the clients I've known for years and, it turns into, you're kind of one of the family taking their photos. So, and some packaging as well. And then cookbooks is another thing that I've done a bit of for the last couple of years. Not too much magazine stuff. So it's, only so many hours in the day. So
Mhm.
that's where the focus is.
Right. And then a little bit of restaurant work too, right?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And you're an educator. So you provide a lot of content for us to learn from on YouTube on your Bite
Yep.
Shot channel. We're going to take a look at that in a second. And in this course, we are actually watching two of your videos on composition. So those
Nice.
two, part 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And then we are also looking in the very beginning of the course at your video on how to fix flat photos, because I think it's a really good explanation of how does light work. And that's a really great starting point. But let's back up just a minute
Yeah.
and maybe you can give us some background information on yourself. Take us back to the day you were born. No, I'm just kidding. I think you might have started out like me, where you were you had another job and you were
Mhm.
taking photos of food that you were either cooking yourself or you were eating in restaurants. Tell us what happened from there.
Yeah. So I think it was around, I feel like I've been blogging in some sort of like way, shape, or fashion since blogging was a thing. Back in 2005, I had a Zynga site, and like the MySpace days, and, some of these things that don't exist anymore. But, as a part of just creating this content with this desire to share with people, and food has always been like an important part of who I am. Like my identity has always been food related since I was a kid. And so it was very natural then for me to just start sharing about what I'm eating and what I'm cooking and what restaurants I'm dining out at. And that continued over time. I moved to New York in 07 and started a WordPress, my very first WordPress blog there, and was mostly sharing stories about where I was dining out at restaurants so that my family back home in Arizona could feel very jealous about all these delicious things that I was experiencing. And so that's when I bought my first little pink point and shoot camera, this little Fuji Power Shot or something like that. I don't even remember exactly the name of it, but it was kind of that first camera purchase. And I didn't know what I was buying. It was just pink and that's all that was important. But that was like a digital camera and started posting that online. Well, fast forward to changed careers. I had been in education for the better part of 10 years and kind of got burned out in the jobs I was doing in that arena and didn't see necessarily myself wanting to continue. Like I looked at my boss's job and thought, I don't want to do that job. So I thought, well, I guess this is the end of the road here for me. So ended up working in the family business, selling point of sale systems to restaurants. So that's where then that love of food kind of gets re-engaged professionally and started to meet a lot of restaurant chefs and a lot of bartenders, restaurateurs, and thought, gosh, these people are fascinating. And somebody needs to start sharing their stories. So I started a podcast in 2012, interviewing local restaurants. And, it's just really interesting. Again, I didn't necessarily have like this intent other than I just wanted to share these stories and create this content. Again, I was going then into the restaurant saying, can I photograph your dishes so that I can create a blog post? And then this was around the time that Instagram was really starting to gain some traction and share this out on Instagram. And lo and behold, started to do that. And about a year and a half in, one of the restaurants said, we really love those pictures you shot for your blog. Can you come shoot the rest of our menu? And I'm like, you want me to do what? Oh my gosh. I mean, I had upgraded to my first mirrorless camera at that point in time, a DSLR camera. And, it's crazy just to think of how that all worked out, but I didn't know what I was doing, but I, stumbled every little step along the way and figured it out. And eventually people started asking me, because I think there's like that natural teacher component that if you're a teacher, you just can't help but teach, like it's just in your DNA. So people started asking me, how can I take better photos? And so started to teach workshops, which then turned into a YouTube channel, which has brought us here today.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we're very glad you're here. Before we get into some of the different things that you're teaching, for example, you teach a course on artificial light, which I'm in the middle of.
Awesome.
It's changed my world.
Yay!
And I'm learning so much. And also a course, another really fantastic course on the business of food photography, how to run a business, how to get business, things like that. So before we dive into that, I really have always wanted to talk to you about productivity and maybe with a little side order of mindset thrown in, because you are producing a lot of content. You do a lot of work. So I know that you work hard, but I know that you must work really smart and efficiently too. In addition, and some of these things I think are related to one's personality, although even personality traits can be malleable, can be, molded according to who we're around that inspires us and the choices we make and things like that. But what are some tools and tips that you have for getting your work done? Because I know that in addition to running a business, you, like most human beings, have a life. You have some kids and a husband. And so what are some things you do? Do you use time blocking? Do you set aside, 8 hours a day, no matter what? Tell us a little bit about, your process.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of always ascribed to the idea of like seasons, the idea that life has seasons and different, weeks have seasons, that I'm really good at focusing on one thing and really pouring my energy in there. And I try to keep things as simple and friction-free as possible in regard to, people love to, because people are super helpful, give me ideas of, oh, you really should go do this. Like you would really kill it on Pinterest. Oh, you would really kill it over here. Like, oh, why don't you start blogging you should do all these things, right? Because people love to give advice. And so I always take that, but I always think back to, first of all, what do I get the most energy from? What can I sit down and do for hours on end and be like as energetic when I start as when I finish? I mean, not discounting the fact that it's all hard work, but knowing that like writing blog posts has this amount of like, I get no energy from that. So I just know like, yeah, I could, but I choose to walk away from certain things knowing that I can't do everything, that there's a very finite amount of time and energy, and where am I going to invest my time for the greatest amount of return, if that makes sense. So for me, like priority is always YouTube, because that's kind of the core of the education side of my business.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately for the photography side of my business, I've built up enough long-term relationships over there that I don't have to pitch like I did when I first started. I don't have to mind the marketing side of that as much anymore, because that sort of takes care of itself. But also along with that, it's saying no to a lot of saying no, to even stuff that I get excited about, and I think that this continues to happen more and more, bigger projects and different things. And I'm like, oh, that would be so much fun. But, I know, again, coming back to where are the priorities and what's most important, but also kind of going back to the idea of seasons, knowing that like, I'm only good at focusing on one or two things at a time, that I cannot divide my attention across different things. So as I looked at the year ahead, and I'm always flexible for change. I think that is one of the aspects of my personality. I think how I was raised, that I love change. I'm very adaptable to change. And so I have sort of a general idea of, we'll block this month that the focus is going to be this, and the focus is going to be this, like, this is where we're going to do this course stuff. And this is where we're going to do this project. This is where this cookbook shoot gets my attention. And so there's enough of like the things like the YouTube and, some other things that just kind of run in my business that do need to be constant, that they are at a manageable place. And also hiring out as I need to in order to have other people help me with those things too. But then at that point, I can really focus then on those bigger chunks. But for me, I was talking with my mom about this recently, and the book Horton Hatches an Egg, if you've ever read that Dr. Seuss book.
Yes.
That she's like, that is you. Like the idea of, if I say I'm going to do something, it will happen. Right. So I'm very careful to say what I will commit to, because I don't want to overcommit. And I, as an achievement oriented person, can tend to overcommit. And that has been something that has happened in the past. And I have to constantly reevaluate that. But I just always know that if I tell people this is happening at this time and this date, like, come heck or high water, I'm going to make it happen. And so if I tell people, I flexed over time on the YouTube channel, but, I said from the outset, I will publish a video every Thursday. And that happened for 2 years. And that consistency built up over time to the point that, it'd be Wednesday night and things weren't done. And I'm like, I'm just going to make it happen, because that was so important to me. So if I say something, and so I always know that the best way to hold myself accountable is to make a promise to somebody that I will show up, or I will do something, or that there's a specific timeline attached to it, because I will sit on that egg until kingdom come.
Wonderful. Love that. I love that. Well, I think you've really talked about YouTube, but I am curious, what was it that made you want to, in the world of food, get into YouTube? Was it just sort of, was it your own intuition that, this is a really good way for me to grow my business? Or did you just like talking? Was it the natural educator? And is it still fun for you?
Yeah. So, there's always been a performance oriented something in me. I was in show choir in high school and in the theater program. And I think that, there are certain things that are just hardwired into us, that it's like, I don't know why I'm compelled to show up in front of people and do these things, but it's like, I can't help it. And I always, like, when I worked in higher education for all those years, one of my absolute favorite parts of that job was getting to train student leaders. So the beginning of every semester, we do these big leadership, like week-long intensives. And my favorite part was preparing for the big presentations and sessions and education. So knowing that kind of that framework was there. But yeah, I had that podcast, and that was what, in 2012, and people are like, oh, podcasts are never going to become a thing. And I'm like, oh man, well, podcasts definitely became a thing. But I did have this insight at a certain point that I wanted to, from a branding perspective, brand more as myself, as Joanie, as opposed to I still loved all these stories, but I just thought, I want to build a business around my brand, because I think too, around that time, I started to see a lot of people doing that. And so I started to YouTube, but teaching recipes, like just recipe videos. And I learned a lot about video. I learned a lot about YouTube and just being on camera. And that never succeeded, but that was great. To me, it was not a failure, because it was great education to learn. And so then when I started to work with other people who saw my photography really kind of taking off, and just the quality of my photos, local bloggers were saying, hey, can you teach us how to do food photography? And I got tired of teaching like the basic information over and over again. I thought, if I can put kind of the basics like aperture, ISO, shutter speed, white balance, working with a diffuser, like some of these basics all into videos, then they can come to my workshop already equipped with that knowledge. So we don't have to start at square one, and we can start at 5 and then get more creative and get into what I think is more of the fun stuff, which is the creative side of things, the composition, styling, color, all of that. So it was mainly born out of necessity, but sort of on the heels of having had a previous YouTube experience and thinking, well, this is just helpful, even if it just helps that group. But lo and behold, there was a lot of people who outside of those local food bloggers were also interested in the content. So
got it. Wonderful.
Mhm.
Now let's talk a little bit about artificial light. We are learning the basics of food photography here, mostly, with our phone. But I do think it's worth mentioning for those who might be interested in someday buying a camera and doing whatever with their food photography skills to grow their skills. Why would it be a good idea for a food photographer to learn how to use artificial light? Because I always heard for years, oh, natural light is best. And then I think it was just this summer that I heard my mentor say, actually, I think the opposite is true, only because there are these other life-related reasons, which, it makes it easier for you to work into your schedule, things like that. But go ahead and talk about artificial light and why you love it so much, because I'm a convert.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think artificial light is so powerful because we do have a lot more flexibility with it, certainly in terms of time, but I think just in like the essence of being able to create a look that if you're shooting with a very specific window, you're going to have a very specific look because of the direction of that window and where the sun is relative to it and the time of year and, all of the various different elements that go into that. So there's certainly an unpredictability with natural light, but at the same time, light is light, right? Photons are photons. Doesn't matter if they're coming from the sun or they're coming from a strobe or they're coming from a LED light, like photons are photons, but the behavior, and you start to see, okay, well, if I want to create that look of that natural light, what kind of tools are at my disposal in terms of artificial light? How can I manipulate those in such a way that they look like that natural light look? So I think that though we have then so much more versatility that, with that window light, we're kind of locked in based on the parameters, the size, if you're in the Pacific Northwest versus if you're in, there was a gal who I was coaching a number of years ago, and she was based in the Bay Area. And then she moved to New Mexico, and she's like, I don't know how to shoot, because she had this big glorious window with diffuse light in the Bay Area, which is very foggy and overcast, and it's glorious. And all of a sudden she shows up to New Mexico. They don't have, it's hard light, it's intense light, it's a different light, in terms of just the character of it. And she's like, I don't know what to do, so having those skills and knowing that then if we have an artificial light source, well, we can do all sorts of things to that. We can modify with soft boxes or different ways we can manipulate that, and we can move that around. We can't really move windows. And two, we can just regulate that output and creating the more consistent look. I think for me, just in terms of like stacking point to point, is that if I'm shooting for a client, I'm shooting something professionally, I want shot 1 and shot 10 to look consistent. And I want to be able to shoot that in more than 5 minutes, that I can absolutely achieve that. Because I did run a test recently as I'm working on some updates for my lighting course. I just set up a pair in a window and saw, just took shots, shot after shot, like exposed it properly, white balance properly, everything was good to go first shot. And then just every 30 seconds to a minute, taking another shot, and how wildly different, even though there were no clouds in the sky, there was nothing really different going on, but just based on the movement of the sun, it was wildly changing that white balance. It was changing the way the shadows, it was just so fascinating. So I feel like we just have that control factor with artificial light. But I do find, and I don't know if this is true for you too, but as I got to know artificial light and really understood it from a more scientific perspective and like the actual science of light, that then coming back to my windows, I just felt that much more equipped to handle that and understanding what's going on with this window. Because now I know all these things that I learned from the artificial light. Now let's apply them backwards to the window, and almost had more fun than shooting with the window. And I find that the window then can inspire ideas back to the artificial light, because there are certain, like that unpredictability factor, things will happen. You go, oh, I really like the way that looks. Why is that happening? So always asking yourself, when we look at light, why is something happening? And if you can figure that out, then you can apply it to artificial light.
Well put, well put. Yeah. And I think that's a fantastic exercise to sort of, take an apple or a plate of oranges or something and just photograph it at your window at a different time, the same day, all day long. It's wild to watch the changes.
Yeah, it's magic. Light is so much fun, as you know, no matter where it comes from, it's fun.
Right. And obviously with artificial light, we can shoot, after we've eaten dinner, we can shoot after we're done with our homework or whatever. It doesn't have to be between 10 and 2 or, 11 and 4 when the sun is. And now speaking of light, and natural light, you live in Arizona, sunny Arizona. My grandma and my grandpa retired to Arizona from Pennsylvania. And so I used to go visit them a lot. And I don't know that I really have any memories of clouds there. So I assume it's sunny most of the time.
Yeah.
Why would it not be ideal for an aspiring food photographer to take their plate of food out into the direct sunlight? Like, what kind of happens? What color is the light? What does it do to the food in terms of what the camera sees?
Yeah, when folks from out of town come visit here, they go, gosh, it's just so bright here. I'm like, I know, I love to be in the shade and indoors, but it is. It's in a very intense, direct, which can be beautiful, right? So I think that with the proper skills and the knowledge of how to manipulate intense hard light, you can yield some really cool results. Like if I took, a salad outdoors at the middle of the day, or depending on where the sun is in the sky, you create that really intense hard light look where we're creating a lot of contrast in an image where the dark shadows are really intense. We've got some really bright highlights, but we can extract a lot of texture there. But I do find that, especially when you're first getting started in food photography, that working with soft light it's just going to be easier, and you're going to be able to get better results quicker and easier in soft light. And a lot of, people have lots of opinions on hard light in the world of food photography. Some people say it's a trend. Some people say, it's more art director driven. There's all sorts of thoughts on it, but regardless of your thoughts, just looking at how does it impact the way that the food looks? Certainly in that intense bright light, any sort of moisture, any sort of reflective components, like if we're talking about, we've got a salad and we've got some drizzle of dressing or something like that, that's going to really reflect back more intensely than it would if we were in a softer lighting situation where we've got more diffuse light kind of spreading more evenly across those highlights. So it's going to give us that different look. For me, and the reason why artificial light became so important, because certainly the schedule factor, having a family and wanting to have the flexibility, also just like the anxiety that comes along with what's the sun doing and what time do I need to shoot at? I want to base the shoot off the food, not off of the light. But I just did find that intense light when I first started out was hard to wrangle. Now, had I had knowledge of diffusers and how to work and manipulate it, proper diffusion material, that may have kept me in the natural light world a bit longer. Because you just, when you're first starting out, and if you don't have mentors and if you don't have resources and you're not sure where to go, but you're just creating this content, you're just making the mistakes along the way. But, had I had a good diffuser, maybe I would have been kinder to that window. But yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I also noticed that I turned one of our bedrooms into a little photo studio, and it's nice. And I still, if it's a nice cloudy day, I'll take some pictures in natural light. But what I do notice is that I do usually see some blue in my whites, from even if it's cloudy, there's some blue sky peeking through there. And the
Mhm.
other thing is I have a giant green hedge out there. And
Oh,
for the longest time, I couldn't figure out, like, why is there so much green in my white? And then I realized it's my hedge. Because
100%.
yeah, I mean, I painted the
Absolutely.
walls white and everything. So anyway, that's
Yeah,
just a
well,
funny
because
story.
even in Arizona, we've got a lot of brown. It's all desert landscaping. So it doesn't reflect back the light in the same way as I've had, yeah, students from the Pacific Northwest or from other green parts, pretty much anywhere other than, Arizona and Southern California, come back and say, what's all this color cast, even too, in consideration of the color of the walls in the room, if you've got some really wild colors going on. That's why actually the wall behind me, it's painted 18% gray. So it is a completely neutral gray so that it won't reflect color back into the scene, so that we end up with color cast issues. So you don't necessarily, and people don't need to go that far and that ridiculous, but in consideration of the space where you're shooting, if you've got orange walls, you're like, why are my pictures orange? That's why.
Yeah. Yeah. I have some funny stories in that regard too, but I'm not going to bore everyone with them about shooting in restaurants that have orange tables and orange walls. But that's
Oh,
okay.
yes.
I think it forces us to improve and to ask for help. You walk into a restaurant and your walls are orange and your tables are orange. You need help.
Absolutely, 100%. Yes,
Yeah.
get some stuff to block that.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk now about a few fun things. First of all, you last year finished writing a book
Did, yep.
on
How I
food
did that, I don't
photography.
know.
It's going to come out next month, April, right? I
Yep.
pre-ordered it. It's all about how to take great food photos. How long did that? I'm sure people were bugging you to do a book for a while. And so something made you finally say yes, and it must have been a combination of factors. But what was the process like? And how long did it take you from, let's just say, like maybe the time you signed the contract to when it became official and people could actually hit that pre-order button?
Yeah. So it was pretty fast for me in the context of writing and photographing a book. Lots of folks I know take much longer. And, in retrospect, it's hard to know. I think everybody's going to be different. And but kind of going back to the apportioning of time, like the time that I was working on the book was really wholly dedicated to the book. Because again, I can really only work on one project at a time. Like, I wish I could be that personality that does a little bit over time, to bring a project to fruition. But I just like to go on one project at a time. So I signed the contract. I'd have to look at exact date, but it was maybe February or March of 2020. So right at the beginning of the pandemic. And maybe before we even knew the pandemic was what it was going to be. We were still in the 14 days to flatten the curve. But then as far as the timeline of due dates, there were a variety of different milestones and due dates that kind of came up. But the first one that was major was that the first version of the manuscript was due, I believe it was June 15th. Or maybe it was July 15th. It was July 15th. So that was the kind of the first version of the draft. Now I have to send a big thank you. I have to find her. My sophomore high school English teacher, Miss Jackson, just taught me so much about language and writing. And I'm just where would I have been without Miss Jackson? Because when I delivered that manuscript, the publisher was very happy with oh, this needs a lot less work than maybe it should. So blessings to Miss Jackson, also Jan Arminio, who was my master's thesis advisor, who got me to stop writing in the passive voice. So much appreciation to all the teachers out there. But so that was pretty much ready to go. They came back with some edits and changes, and we dug deeper because you get kind of the first version. You're like, okay, now I can see it. Now I can touch it and hold it, as a written document. So then that final version was due mid-August, and then all of the photos were due the end of August. So pretty much March to about August, we had everything. And then through the course of September, October, we were kind of going back and forth on edits. And I mean, it went through like 20 different people in terms of edits and changes and updates and perfecting. And I just noticed the other day, I've got one of the first runs of the book, and there is a mistake in it. I'm like, it's such as life, right? There's no such thing as perfect, but it'll be perfect in the third printing. But yeah, so it was a pretty quick process in the context of book writing. And
I would say so. Not
Yeah.
that I have any experience in that area specifically, but it just seems like that's a very condensed, period of time. So
Yeah.
good
But I
job.
was pretty much wholly dedicated to that at that point. Like that was pretty much all I had, especially I would say April, May, June, July, and August. So though, I mean, there was really not a lot of, I had some clients going on. I still had YouTube stuff and, supporting students in classes. But other than that, that was the main project. That was the main assignment at that point.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. And here's something else that's fun to talk about. And I don't know how you were feeling at the time when you started all this, if you had an idea, like a 10-year plan of where you wanted to see your business go. But I know that you're building a big studio outside your home, so you won't have to shoot in your home anymore. I've seen the progress. It looks amazing.
Yeah.
And I personally am excited about, you mentioned that you were throwing around the idea of maybe doing like a summer camp. I mean, of course, when we're all vaccinated and healthy,
Right.
who knows when that will be, but maybe when that happens, you might do something a little different. I mean, we have workshops and we have online classes, but like, I love that idea of a little summer camp, So
I
tell me
know.
about the studio.
So the studio, I'm actually in it right now. I'm on the shooting half of it. The kitchen half is not done. So, but we did actually get our, officially the city signed off on the permit as far as the certificate of occupancy. So we are officially good to go in terms of the city is concerned. So we just, at this point, it's all cosmetics that, just as far as what needs to be finished. But then, yeah, once it's done, then we've got a lot of elbow room, and it is pretty hilarious. I think a lot of family and folks and other people who I know who don't totally understand what it is that I'm doing over here are like, why does she need all that space? Because
Right.
it's on the same property as our home, but it is, it's detached. I mean, it's connected via a little walkway, but otherwise it is sort of its own freestanding building. But it's literally the size of the rest of the house. And people are like, why does she need all that space? And my parents just laugh and go, she needs the space. So it's going to be so nice in terms of productions just to have the room, because that's been a challenge that I've always liked and preferred, shooting in my own space where I have all of my gear and my equipment and my props. Because in food photography, it's not like showing up and there's a model, who's, and we're just going out into nature, or we're just showing, there's like so many little parts and pieces, and you never know when you're going to need that ramekin, and you're going to never know until you get into the scene. And so especially if you're like a cookbook we shot 2 years ago, that the original discussion with the group was, okay, we'll rent a studio and we'll do this at the studio, which is about 20 minutes from my house. Because that's the other thing too, there's no great photography studios here in Phoenix that have a full working kitchen. There's like little kitchenettes, there's a microwave and a countertop, but there's not like the full, if you want a chef to come in and be able to prepare a dish, or a food stylist or a home economic, that there's not that. So I had to build it. But that's why that cookbook shoot, I said, we could rent a studio, but I'm going to tell you, we're going to have a lot more success, and it's just going to make things a lot less stressful if we can do this in my own space. And so fortunately the publisher was on board for that. And I said, I promise I'll kick the kids and the dog and the husband out, and we will wholly devote the house to that project the whole week. And we did, and it worked out great. And it was, in retrospect, I just think about how many of those images, there were things that we were like, oh, we need a this. And I just happen to have it in my kitchen fridge, and oh, we need a this, and I happen to have it in my props collection, and that we could start early and late. We didn't have to clean up directly after the shoot was over. We didn't have to feel rushed. So having your own space, it's not required to successfully do food photography by any stretch, but from a standpoint of making life easier now that it's a reality, it's just so nice.
Yeah. And also, just in terms of space, I mean, sometimes working on larger production projects, you're going to have more people. You might have an art director, you might have a creative director, you might have a stylist or two, maybe an assistant, maybe a digital tech, maybe a dishwasher. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
so
When we had the that cookbook production again, we were doing it in my house, which isn't like a terribly large house in and of itself. It's what 1,600 square feet, so it's not a massive home. It was big enough though to do what we needed to do, and we cleared out the living room and used that, and then also the area that I have for the studio. But yeah, I mean, there were certain points which we'd have like 8, 10. At one point, there was a chef who brought like all of his PR team and social media people, and you're like, I mean, we had like 20 people. Like, we are packed to the gills. So this will be just nice, in designing the studio, people kept saying, well, don't you want to like add more rooms or, like design, like it's literally just like a giant box, like it's a big old rectangle. And that is very much on purpose. And you're like, oh, what furniture? I'm like, I don't want furniture. Like, I just need a big giant room that then I can turn into whatever I need it to be, depending on what the shoot requires.
exactly. Okay, I have a couple questions left, but I thought we would just take a breather and share my screen and go look at some of your work. So let's see if I can do that. Can you? Here we go. Okay, so, Can you see my screen, Joanie?
I can, yep.
Okay, so let's go over here to Joanie Simon, the bite shot. Look at that chocolate cake. That looks incredible. Here is your book that's coming out. Here's some
that's actually Kimberly's book.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You're right.
Oh, you're okay. I know there's a lot of food photography books. Kimberly's book is incredible.
Yes. And there's Muffin, your mom's dog. Look at these. Okay, here's one shot of these turquoise cupcakes. I know you've said that cupcakes might be your favorite food to photograph, but look at this shot. I mean, that is gorgeous.
Thank you.
So these are just some examples of Joanie's work here. How can I get out of this window? Okay, it's not going to let me. So I'm just going to.
Oh, there's a little X in the upper right, I think.
Oh, there it is. My face is kind of in the way. There we go.
Oh, you're okay.
And now let's hop over to YouTube. And here's your YouTube channel. It's the bite shot. There's just, I mean, how many years of content are on here? Like 4?
So it'll be for the September. So it started September 1st, 2017. And I think last year I published a bit less because I did give myself some permission to be honest, from day one, I thought, oh, if I ever reach 10,000 subscribers, that would be incredible, And so I just kind of go, holy moly, that there's that many people, and it is always so funny too. I think, in life and in this digital age, people will say, oh, well, you haven't really made it till you get to 1 million, or, and people will go, people like have all these things they tell you. And I'm like, but I am just still shocked that there are this many people on my channel, who watch my content. And I like, if the audience never grew any bigger than it is today, I'd be thrilled with it. Cause I feel like I found my people. I've found this community. I've found other humans who are interested in what it is that I do. And so I don't have these big dreams of 1 million subscribers. I'm like, I just feel like, oh, it's like the idea of like more money, more problems, more people, more problems, right? True. So, it is pretty wild though, just to think. And I think that one of the things that I hope, I think we're in a weird place in the social media realm today. I mean, this may be a separate soapbox, but just, I think that we get so caught up in the numbers and what people think. And, I think at the end of the day, like if you're able to do what it is that makes you happy. And I mean, I love to teach. Like, I literally think I was put on this planet with this special gift to communicate and to teach things. And so that's what I do, and I also really love to take pictures of food. And so however I can do those two things as often as possible, I know that that's absolutely sustainable.
Well, again, we're glad that you do that. I think it's really important you talk a little bit about, and we'll segue into your course on the business of food photography, full-time framework. One of the first exercises you have us do is like a cost of doing business calculator where, and in the beginning, once you figure out how much it costs you to run your business, and there are all these things that you may have not taken into account before, and you crunch the numbers and you think, yeah, but I can't charge that because I just don't feel my work is up to that level of professionalism yet. But at least it gives you something to shoot for or move towards, and also just the exercise of claiming your value, your time and your value as a professional. But oh gosh, see, I've lost my train of thought.
Good.
But
You're good.
maybe I'll just have you talk a little bit about the main parts of that course. Like, what are some of the other, global things you're talking about in terms of running a business,
Oh, yeah.
photography business?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it in terms of the life cycle of a photography business. I mean, certainly there's like kind of that laying the foundation of, if you are going to start a business, because I think and I don't know if this is a lot of people's experiences, but might be, we get into photography as this creative thing and we don't necessarily see it as a business from day one. I know I didn't. And so you're not planning on it in the same way as somebody who's invented something and is like, I'm going to go sell this and I'm going to go like on Shark Tank and create a business. You know what I mean? So I think that like we sort of like find ourselves in a business and you're like, oh, I didn't set out to be a business owner. So that's where I think, things get done a little backward. So thinking about it though, as if you have invented something or you are like, okay, I am going to start a business and that this is a business venture. And, people, I think where we also get inside our heads too, where we start to think, well, I'm not ready for that, or my work's not good enough, because we play the comparison game and we get on Instagram but those people's photos are so much better and all that head trash, which I do too, right? So we have to have like a good distance and boundaries with those kind of things. But I think that if we can treat it like, okay, I am starting a business, and so all of just those like logistical things in terms of bookkeeping, and I mean, super boring stuff, but it's super important, and getting registered and bank accounts and all that stuff. And so then also understanding the cost to run a photography business, because I think there's so many costs that we just don't even think about. We just go, oh, well, that's just one more thing. But if you really sit and look at the numbers, I remember the first time I did, and I was like, oh gosh, these things really do add up, and it's expensive to run a photography business. And anybody, I mean, I am not an advocate for spending unnecessary money. And I think that anybody who checks out my gear recommendations knows that I'm not going with like the top level professional gear, because I don't think you need it to, I don't need it to be successful. If you have that kind of money and if you are working with kinds of clients where that's important. But all that being said, I think being realistic with the numbers and what it costs, because photography is expensive. It is, no matter how you slice it, it's expensive. And so then from there, okay, well, if we have this business and we have this talent and we want to help people, how do we get those people in the door? So how do we market our work? How do we connect with potential clients? And how do we understand who those clients are? And how do we work with different kinds of clients? Working with a magazine is different than working with a cookbook, which is different than working with a food brand, which is different than working with an advertising agency. So there's little nuances to all of those. And then, when somebody does show up on your doorstep, if you're like me, when that restaurant's like, oh, what do you charge to do food photography for our menu? And I'm like, I don't know, right? So how to understand what those, what kind of costs are associated with that and what we would charge. And then from there, as far as being able to execute that shoot and how to plan for that shoot, because especially any photo shoot, I've got a friend he's actually doing a shoot today for a video game cover. And he's been planning, for weeks for this, in the last couple of days, going through a lot of different planning, and it's just 4 shots. They're shooting 4 shots today, but there's a lot of planning and a lot that goes in advance there. And especially for food photography, when we're talking props and, styling and food preparation and all that stuff. So, and then from there, how to maintain those relationships, how to connect with people. Because I think that one of the other things that a lot of photographers will say is like, as like a lot of actors will say is, okay, I've gotten hired for a job and now I'm done with that job. Okay, so now I got to find another job, right? Now, there are certainly, and I think the digital era has brought on opportunities for ongoing work that needs to be done regularly. I don't personally work on retainer, but there are jobs out there and people who do that kind of stuff with clients where they say, okay, they need this amount of social media content every month. So we're going to produce that on an ongoing basis. But whether you're doing something regularly for somebody or you're just shooting one shoot and then get hiring for another shoot, 6 months from now, building that relationship and making it easy to work with people, that it's easy to work with you and that they feel like they can trust you. So the next time they need photos that they're coming back to you. And then and then sustaining your business from there.
Yeah, that was huge for me. Because, as an introvert, and also you really stress, not only maintaining those relationships and just having it be relationship centered, but also the growth of the business is related to the amount of, I don't want to use the word hustle, but networking that you do, getting over yourself and just putting yourself out there, whether it's I need help or, hey, do you want to shoot together? Like, do you want to just do something for fun to learn people, joining clubs or associations, things like that. That was a really golden nugget of information for me. And like I said, it doesn't really come naturally to me, but I do. What does is thanking those who I feel that I've learned from, and you are definitely one of those people. And so it's just been so helpful to me as a person and in my business, to everything that I've learned from you and others too. But that's why I've been so excited for this morning to talk to you, meet you kind of in person. Yes. I do have one more question for you.
Yeah, totally.
And that is, let's assume that maybe our average student is someone like me who sort of like started out cooking dinner. Maybe I've got some spaghetti and meatballs and I plop them down here on the kitchen table and I get out my camera and my phone and I shoot. That's the extent of my planning. I've got a yellow light overhead.
Really?
I may be even wearing an orange shirt, maybe I'm standing, I'm blocking the light in the window, something like that. Because I know you have a really helpful couple videos that I have put into a playlist for our students. Nice. That tells us how to shoot and how to edit using your phone. But if you could sort of distill that information into maybe 2 or 3 top tips, like to get us moving in a more professional direction, what would those be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, one of the things when I look back at old photos of mine, like before I knew what I was doing, right? Doing the same exact thing, like here's dinner and I'm going to shoot it. One of the things that I think changes the game very quickly is in understanding color, temperature, and white balance, especially in food, because you can look at, like, if you look at different movies or you look at different people photography, like we can really get creative with the colors and we can still understand it. And I mean, it will create a mood and it will change the image. But in food, if the food doesn't look the right color, it just looks off, right? So like the orangey restaurant lights or your home lights or things like that. So if we can get the camera in a white balance setting where it is agreeing with the color of the temperature of the lights that we're shooting with. So if you're shooting in your home and you've got the overhead lights using available light, then going with something like the tungsten setting or something where it's going to help the camera accommodate towards that orangey side so that it looks more natural. But for sure, I mean, if you're not at the point of investing in lights and things like that, like there's really nothing better than the indirect sunlight coming from a north or a south facing window for the most part. I mean, every window is going to be different, but if you can set up in a window and look at the shadows falling on that, is there an immediate line where it's very clear, like this is shadow and this is light? Or is it more gradual and gradient? And if it's more gradual and gradient, then that's an indication you're in a soft lighting situation, that you're in indirect soft lighting, and you're going to have a lot more success, like just easier right out the gate with no matter what camera you're shooting. So, again, you'll have to figure out the cardinal directions of north, south, east, and west, but north and south, generally, you're not going to have the light directly beaming in through that window. So you're going to get that softer lighting look, which is really helpful. So I feel like if you can identify a window and identify your white balance. And then two, if you do have a window and say, like, for example, me, if I could give advice to myself, 10 years ago when I was trying to figure out how to wrangle the light coming out of my windows, because even here in Arizona, north and south facing windows might still have direct sunlight just because it's so dying bright. So in which case, getting some sort of thin curtain or something where that light can be softened and diffused to create that softer lighting look. So, just really taking the advantage of those things. Not to say that you can't shoot stuff in your kitchen with available light and still have good results as long as that white balance is in check. But I think those are two good starting places for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Joanie.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us and for all you do. And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Sue.
Okay.